All right. Hello, everyone. So this is my presentation for the Special Populations Project. And so my special population is specifically elementary school students and how they cope with grief and the trauma that is associated with that. So the agenda for today is the top background research that's associated with it, my interest and plan in using my research that I've done, and the resources that I've found as well. Okay, so to start, just some uh population background on elementary school students. Um, I'm gonna start with the Piaget developmental stages and his theory in terms of conceptualizing elementary school students. So let's start with the pre-operational stage, which is from ages 2 to 7. Because elementary school, it can range from ages 5 to 11, but could be younger if pre-K is offered, or it could be older if students are held back. So pre-operational stage 2 to 7. And so egocentrism is a part of this stage with assumes that other people see the world as they see it. They also process through language and mental imagery, and they have difficulties with problem solving and categorization. And so then they move into the concrete operational stage from 7 to 11, which they're moving from symbolic thought to logical thought. So it's less egocentrism, it's more logical in terms of thoughts and events, and then they internally process their problem solving. So some just specific developmental considerations for 6 to 12 year olds, and from like 6 to 7, they understand numbers, and then that moves into 8 to 9, where they understand fractions, and then it just gets more complex, including reading, where 6 to 7, they are just starting. 8 to 9, they're reading for enjoyment, and then 10 to 12, they're reading well. And there's also a wide range of normal heights for these 6 to 12 year olds. So they're starting to develop much more self-awareness in terms of like how their body compares to other people's bodies. So there's a lot more self consciousness and self-esteem. There's also different social interactions in terms of 6 to 7 year olds just playing with friends that are the same gender, and then 8 to 9, they start to mix friends, and then 10 to 12, they really do place a value. They like establish a best friend, and they also start to develop romantic issues or interests. And like at 8 to 9, they also have romantic interests, but they don't talk about them or try to develop. Um, some specific school considerations for like school counselors is that the main focus of elementary school counselors programs are cognitive regulation, emotional processing, and social and interpersonal skills. So with cognitive regulation, we're really looking at establishing a goal for these kiddos to establish goals. Impulse control, so if they can raise their hand instead of blurting out, or resisting distractions, as well as keeping task relevant information in mind, so remembering the instructions. They're also developing problem solving. With emotional processing, you're really getting into the like recognizing, expressing, and regulating emotions, as well as building relationships, and empathizing with other people. And all of this leads with cognitive regulation as well in terms of like connection seeking. And then social and interpersonal skills, again, also overlaps the cognitive and emotional, um, with understanding other people's behaviors, navigating social situations, you're collaborating with your peers, and you're just coexisting with others. And so research shows a positive correlation to academic, social, and mental health outcomes in focusing on these three areas. And the like overarching themes are that it increases attention, manages negative emotions, develops relationships with peers and adults, they're able to manage difficulties, um, and they have, in terms of academics, overall standardized test scores are higher. So, research and grief. So, just to understand the basics of grief, it is a natural reaction to a loss, and it is an ongoing process that is unique to every individual. And so, some things that influence it are like maturity, which maturity is in relevance to age, cognitive ability, and life experiences, as well as the socialization of a person. So, are they in private school or are they in public school? Are they homeschooled? As well as the exposure to death. So, like, was it like, did they witness it, or was it a further off death, like a great grandparent who lives in a different state? And then the relationship to the deceased also, which also influence exposure to death. And then grieving is the personal thoughts and feelings associated with the loss. And that is an ongoing process. And so things that you'll see in terms of the reactions that are also we talked about in terms of development in school counselor programs. So physical, you see changes in behavior. You see crying, fidgeting, fighting, tantrums, all of these different things. For emotion, they have big feelings. They're sad, depressed, hopeless, hopeless. In terms of cognitive, it could change the way they think. So are they avoiding? Are they in denial? Are they really distractible? Are they inattentive or confused? And then finally, social, they might have changes in relationships with being more withdrawn and isolating themselves. They might be more argumentative, um, connection seeking, because I dislike the term attention seeking, or rebellious. So, school setting specific with thinking about grief is that adults, specific to parents and teachers, try to avoid or attempt to change the subject to protect children from painful emotions, which then creates limits to these kids understanding their emotions and creating coping mechanisms related to grief. And so, school counselors can create curriculum in terms of like small groups, individuals, or even classroom lessons to really get to help the most amount of students in their curriculum to increase the students' understandings about death. And so we're adding sensitive, age appropriate language that are objective, not subjective, groups or classroom lessons to the curriculum. And so this is just an example of what that could look like in adding a curriculum or group to your lesson. And so the idea is that you're educating children on this word penthos. And so the topic is you're defining concept of penthos, which is like grief and grieving. And so the objective is that kids are going to be able to name different kinds of loss, recognize that loss is an inevitable part of life, and appreciate the individuality of grieving and how everyone does it differently. Um, and then it just goes on further, and there are multiple different steps, like factors that may affect grieving, empathy. So we're really building up the emotional expression and feeling the emotion and recognizing emotions and being able to communicate what when we do have those emotions, as well as honoring memories of the loss. And so some evidence-based interventions could include the family bereavement program, which is used specifically with children who are ages 8 to 16, as well as surviving caregivers. So the intent is for children and families who have a loss of a caregiver, parent or guardian. Um, and so the overall goal is to target risk and protective factors that we can modify to improve mental health outcomes. And so it's grounded in CBT, cognitive behavioral theory, and that you use role playing to teach skills. You have weekly assignments to practice at home. And there are multiple studies that have been done on this, and they have really positive outcomes in terms of improved caregiver-child relationships, increased coping mechanisms, decreased mental health problems, and higher self-esteem. And this has been looked at in short and long term. You could also use a grief and trauma intervention, which is used for specifically children who are ages 7 to 12 who have experienced a post-traumatic stress um, symptoms due to death, disaster, or violence. This is again grounded in cognitive behavioral theory, but it's also grounded in narrative therapy. And there are four overall arching goals, which are to learn more about grief and trauma reactions, to express thoughts and feelings about what happened, to decrease the PTSD reactions, and to build up coping and understand their support system. So to look more in depth at the FBP, the Family Bereavement Program, you have both the caregiver and the child. So um for the caregiver specific, like there could be 11 sessions. And so these are the skills that you would practice at home. So personal and family goals, making sure you're scheduling in family fun time, um, and developing listening skills and identifying feelings and just really being able to communicate what's happening. And then for child specific, um, again, 11 sessions. These are the things that they can do at home in terms of like being positive to caregivers, noticing like a hopeful and hurtful thought, and then replacing the hurtful with helpful. So really honoring both of those emotions, and then communicating, really getting into the social, interpersonal, and cognitive and emotional that school counselors work on. So, why am I interested in this topic? I wanted to expand my knowledge about grief because I feel like we haven't had a really solid conversation regarding grief and what to do when a child is experiencing the loss of either a parent, caregiver, another family member, or even a pet. Um, and so how I also wanted to know like what ways that might show up in my kids, like what like that chart that I showed in terms of the behaviors or the emotions or the social aspects, um, as well as understanding different interventions in counseling associated with grief, like the FBP or the grief and trauma intervention, which are aligned with CBT, which is a theory that I very much enjoy. And I also currently have students that are struggling with a loss and putting a lot of blame on themselves, um, and wanting to know how to navigate that and what I can process with them or what I can offer caregivers to continue to provide open communication, like your feelings are valid, like let's honor your parent or caregiver who passed away or your pet who passed away. So, and that kind of leads into my plan and how I intend to use it. Like, unfortunately though, with this being the end of the semester, I cannot implement as much of the research as what I could if I had all of this information at the beginning of the semester. However, in my goal is to be an elementary school counselor, so I intend to use this in the future. I intend to also base my curriculum or create a group plan ahead of time with these factors in mind in order to be most prepared and to provide the best service to my students and to like help them create those internal coping skills or for them to understand their support system and to like create an open conversation about death and dying because it does happen, unfortunately, and to be as transparent as possible with the kids instead of just pushing it aside and not honoring their feelings. I also think I can use it this semester in terms of educating the teachers or administrations um when they say like their kids are attention seeking or they're acting out instead of like recognizing like no, they did just have this traumatic thing happen to them um in their family, and maybe that's why they're experiencing all of these big things. So some resources. um Teachers Pay Teachers has a lot of different curriculums already made, uh, or they have like a grief kit for students. There's also a lot of different children's book, like The Memory Box, a book about grief, as well as When Dinosaurs Die, a guide to understanding death, as well as a article that I had mentioned previously. There's a lot of different activities and books and in terms of books and then a following activity that you can do. So like just examples of just straight activities. There's balloon juggling, trying to keep three balloons in the air and then asking a friend to help and like or in order to understand how you're building trust, or create like really different ways to establish the supports that they have and create a family album and have a discussion about ways they miss the person and draw a bridge to other individuals or family members that they feel they're supported by or that they feel care about them a lot. Roanoke City Public Schools, their website also has an amazing um resource area in terms of like understanding the reactions or how does my child or young person grieve? How do preschoolers grieve? What do we do? And then you also can find mental health support and outside of school resources, counseling with um clinical support because there's only unfortunately so much that can be done in a school system. So those that's what I learned. And here are my sources. And if you have any questions, please let me know.